there was one young girl, she came to the embassy. She was about 18, 19 years old. And she said, I'm an American citizen, but I was taken from my family at a young age. My father brought me to Nigeria and left me here. I don't have any of my paperwork, but I remember being in the US. And we were able to find that indeed her mother, she had been, it's called a parental kidnapping, that her mother had filed years ago when she was very young, I think 6, 7 years old, had filed with the embassy looking for the child. We weren't able to locate her. She was out in a village. And so we were able to, she had very distinctive, I remember she had very distinctive light gray, green eyes. And we were able to match her pictures and her passport from back then when she was a child to this adult woman. And we were able to reunite them. I received about 6 months later a Christmas card from her and her mother. And it was just, oh, like I still have it in a box somewhere. But if I just think about the story, I tear up and I thought, okay, that
Yeah.
is the whole reason why I'm here is to do things like that.
Hey, it's Jen, and welcome back to How to Diplomat. That is Maria Brewer, former US ambassador, describing the moment she helped reunite a kidnapped daughter with her mother after years of separation. So much about diplomacy is misunderstood. People imagine cocktail parties and smooth talking, and of course there's a little bit of that, inevitably. But the diplomats I speak to often tell me stories like this one, where they felt they had a direct impact on someone's life. Sure, we love being involved in geopolitics, but it can be even more meaningful to know that you've changed the course of at least one person's story. Maria spent 29 years in the US Foreign Service, serving as Deputy Chief of Mission in Nigeria during the rise of Boko Haram, as Ambassador Sierra Leone through the COVID pandemic, and later as ambassador to Lesotho. More recently, she's just stepped into her new chapter as a leadership coach. In this conversation, she'll show you what I call receive mode leadership, the art of listening to understand rather than just waiting to speak. You'll also hear why the skills that got you here won't necessarily take you to where you want to go next, and the one mindset shift that can turn you from manager into true strategic leader. Maria also shares her bloom where planted philosophy. It's a lesson that started with guarding congressional luggage and ended with running entire embassies. So one quick note before we dive in. As ever, the reflections you're about to hear are our own personal perspectives, not those of either of our former employers. So if you've ever wondered how diplomats stay unflappable under pressure while somehow getting rivals to cooperate, this episode will change the way you approach your next meeting. Let's get started. Hi, Maria. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I'm so pleased. You described diplomacy as more than a job, as a calling. But a calling often comes with sacrifice, right? Without putting you too much on the spot right from the get-go, what is one moment, personal or professional, where you felt that weight most intensely?
No, certainly, you have to be careful about what you say, where you go, what you do. Very often people are sort of watching you. I remember when I was in Sierra Leone as the ambassador, on the weekends, I would be in my, shorts and t-shirt and going to the store, and people would literally come up to me and say, "Can I get a picture with you?" They were very nice and respectful, but I was thinking, oh gosh, I'm wearing my Sunday clothes, not my, suit outfit. And, it was just, it was a good reminder that you're never off, really. And so, a certain amount of freedom of speech is curtailed, a certain amount of, just making sure that you're always kind of ready to be seen and ready to be heard and recorded. And that, that's a lot of pressure compared to certainly like a 9 to 5 job, when you're domestic home, you're able to clock out.
I remember in my first overseas posting, we were all living on compound and socialising on compound and sunbathing on compound, and the ambassador would come down in his swimming shorts and go for a swim. And well, it's the most senior member of and you'd be having a conversation with them, and you'd all be in your swimsuits, and it just felt just really uncomfortable.
Although I have to say, some of the posts that I've served at, I call them the make your own fun kind of posts. because the smaller places, a little more out of the way places, maybe there isn't. I mean, I've been in places where there isn't even a movie theater, much less places to go and have fun. You kind of have to make your own, whether that's board games or crafting clubs or any other kinds of gets together,
Mm.
book clubs. I actually enjoy those, and I think in the modern world, as we're becoming more disconnected in many ways, going to places where really you have to create your own community and again make your own fun. I find those to be kind of the special places, and so I enjoyed them.
I agree. I think when you're living a regular life and not overseas or not in this kind of strange world that we inhabited for a while, you can pick and choose the kinds of people that you live and work with, or, you socialize with and hang out and make your community. But I think when you're overseas, and particularly at small embassies, you don't really have the luxury of choosing who you hang out with and how you spend your time. So as you say, you get more creative about what you're doing with your time.
No, exactly. And as I was moving up sort of in the ranks and becoming more senior, I would very often counsel more junior employees, like, don't lock yourself away in your house and just, go on the internet and talk to friends and family. It's great, do it sometimes, but try to engage with your host community, with each other, with other embassies. We sort of call the like-mindeds. Get out there and really enjoy your time here.
I agree. And another piece of advice somebody gave me was do your very best not to leave post for the first 3 months. And that's on the caveat that you're not in a really hardship place where you're rotating in and out every fortnight. But, try and stay in post for at least 3 months just to get used to it. Because if you leave any sooner than that, you end up going through the whole homesickness and loneliness and isolation thing all over again.
Yeah.
What drew you to this
Sure. I grew up
nomadic life?
yeah, I grew up in Indiana. If you ever saw the show Parks and Rec, it was sort of like
Yeah.
that. Not very exciting place to be, but a great place to be from. And so I was a very bookish child and I read a lot and I would read about these exotic places, the Taj Mahal, the pyramids of Egypt, Africa safari, and I would dream like, what is it like to go and see those places, to be there? And so, as I went to university, I studied Spanish, I studied international economics, and that wound up sort of being an ideal placement for the Foreign Service exam. So it all worked together. And at this point, I've seen all of those places. So it's amazing.
Did you go straight into the service after university then?
I did. I did. I was 23 years old. I had taken the Foreign Service exam my senior year of college. Then at the time we were, as we are now, we were going through a phase of very low hiring, nearly 30 years ago, and I wasn't actually hired until 1996, 2 years after I took the exam. So basically 1 year after university I was hired on the Foreign Service. So 23 years old, I was the youngest in my cohort, my new hire class. Yeah, and it's been really my entire adult life.
Amazing. And when did you realize that it wasn't a career, but more of a vocation, or truly like your vocation?
Yeah, I think my first posting, the work that I was doing was American Citizen Services. And some of it's very mundane, literally doing notarials and
Mm.
reports of birth abroad and updating passports, things like that. But we also helped American citizens in need. And there
Mm.
was one young girl, she came to the embassy. She was about 18, 19 years old. And she said, I'm an American citizen, but I was taken from my family at a young age. My father brought me to Nigeria and left me here. I don't have any of my paperwork, but I remember being in the US, and we were able to find that indeed her mother, it's called a parental kidnapping, that her mother had filed years ago when she was very young, I think 6, 7 years old, had filed with the embassy looking for the child. We weren't able to locate her. She was out in a village. And so we were able to, she had very distinctive, I remember she had very distinctive light gray, green eyes. And we were able to match her pictures and her passport from back then when she was a child to this adult woman. And we were able to reunite them. I received about 6 months later a Christmas card from her and her mother. And it was just, oh, like I still have it in a box somewhere. But if I just think about the story, I tear up and I thought, okay, that
Yeah.
is the whole reason why I'm here is to do things like that. And it was such it made such an impression. It was probably my first year at my posting and in Nigeria, and it was just amazing.
A lot of my overseas work was in
Mhm.
comms and media handling and press handling. And so I was involved in crises on the peripheral. So I was part of the crises team, but never
Mm.
actually doing the consular work. And I had nothing but admiration for the consular staff because they were dealing with very, very difficult cases. Perhaps there was bereavements, perhaps there was missing children, perhaps there was forced marriages, perhaps all sorts of things. But they would soldier on, I think, because there would be occasionally that one of those
Mhm.
beautiful cases where all goes right and a child is reunited with their
Mhm.
parent, or, the worst had been feared, but in fact it was different. And so did you specialize in consular affairs?
Yeah, actually, the way our system works is that you usually spend either your first tour or your second tour, or sometimes even both, when you're they call it pre-tenuring. You get tenure after 36 to 60 months, but you spend a lot of that time in the consular field. So we don't have a separate consular corps. As you come up through the ranks, you usually spend 1 or 2 tours doing consular work before you work in your cone, whether it's public diplomacy, economic or political reporting, or the cone that I was, management, which are the folks that keep everything running at the embassy. So I
Yes.
did that for many
Okay.
years.
So within consular is visa as well. So it's supporting American
Yes.
nationals overseas as well as visa. So in our
As
system, we've
yeah,
got them completely different, interestingly.
yeah, we have that's a facet. American Citizen Service is a facet of our consular
Okay.
affairs.
And so if you think about, the very junior Maria, the diplomat, was there anything that you got wrong or misunderstood about diplomacy that experience has kind of overturned or
Yeah.
re-educated you?
I'm sure so much. I think, as you get older, you realize how important it is just understanding the other. And I feel like so often in diplomacy and frankly in life, we're on transmit mode and we're not in receive mode. I think being more in receive mode is that's where our true power lies.
Mm.
And I think so often we're so busy saying our policy, our position, our talking points, our demarche, whatever it is, that we're not truly on receive mode. It's sort of the phrase, are you listening to understand or are you waiting to speak? And so often especially when I was more junior, but even now I'll catch myself just waiting to speak, not
Yeah.
actually listening to understand.
Yeah, just thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. I remember, I did the same. I remember being very nervous about going into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or whatever, and I had my lines to take, and then, or your day march, and it was just so awkward. And I think a lot of MFA officials used to kind of take pity on me and just make it as easy as possible, and we'd have a lovely chat afterwards, and it was fine.
Yeah, and sometimes, you realize you're both playing a role. You're saying what you were told by your capital, they're saying what they were told by their superiors. And sometimes, as you'd say, you each say your piece and, oh, okay, take your notes dutifully, and then put down the pad and say, all right, let's have a cup of tea. Let's just talk. And
Exactly.
yeah.
The coffee would come in. You're dead
Yeah.
right. So how many times were you ambassador? How many years were you ambassador?
I was ambassador twice. The first to the Republic of Sierra Leone, 2017 to 2021, which unfortunately coincided for a good deal of time with COVID, which was added difficulty. And so I stayed there a little bit longer because COVID kind of slowed everything down. And then I went to the Kingdom of Lesotho, which is a tiny nation completely surrounded by South Africa. I was there 2022 to 24, 2 years, and
Gorgeous.
I guess four, so six total. Yeah.
But you weren't just an ambassador. I mean, I say just. I don't mean it as in
Yeah.
demeaning. But you weren't
Only.
also an
Solely.
ambassador. So that's it. That's the word. You are also a mother. So what did that kind of dual role look like in practice?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and I think one that I share with a lot of working moms, not unique to me or
Hmm.
diplomacy. I think Um, early on, I received advice from a friend who was also a mom, and she said, you can't be 50-50 mom and diplomat. You have to be sometimes 100% mom and 100% diplomat. But if you try to be 50-50 all the time, you're not going to make it. You're going to just lose it. So There were times when I was 100% mom, and there were times when I was 100% diplomat, and, some varying degrees in between. I was fortunate in that I was more senior by the time we adopted our daughter. So I had the luxury of being able to really curate my schedule and pick what I was going to do. So I was able to say to my staff, for example, hey, my daughter's got her school play on, Tuesday at, 4 p.m. That's sacrosanct. Someone else can take that. And I really, setting that as my red line, that there were certain things that were just sacrosanct. At the same time, I wound up working plenty of nights and weekends, right? So I just, I knew those moments when I really had to be there for my daughter.
And did your daughter, was she old enough to understand the role, or the important role? I mean, you're like I won't say royalty, it's their own country, but like you're a VIP in your host country, or you're treated like one. Did she understand?
I think she saw how others treated me and was kind of puzzled. I think there's a biblical phrase, and I'm not going to say it correctly, but it's something like "No prophet is respected in their home country." It's kind of
Yeah.
like that. My daughter was and remains supremely unimpressed by my title of ambassador, or she was like, yeah, okay, everyone else calls you ambassador, but you're still my mom.
It's what's for supper. Thanks very much.
Which is good. It's very grounding, right? You can't get kind of too big for your britches when your teenage daughter's looking at you.
Yes. Well, teenagers have a way of bringing you down quite well, don't they?
Yes.
But she has had some exciting adventures you were telling me about.
Yes, well, in one case, her school was in Sierra Leone, was next to the Nigerian embassy. The Nigerians were having some sort of a protest that turned into a riot, and they deployed tear gas to disperse the rioters. But of course, tear gas doesn't remain confined in one area. It gets out.
It's everywhere. Yeah.
Exactly. So she and her classmates had to go into their safe haven, which was a locked room with no windows, and had to stay there for several hours, locked in, waiting for the tear gas to disperse and waiting for the rioters to disperse so that they could go home. And of course, as a parent, I knew that I couldn't rush, your first instinct is to rush to your child. But as both a parent and the US ambassador, especially with staff that also had their children at that same school,
Yes.
I had to, say, no, we're getting the reports. We know that they're safe. We know that there's no danger to the children. So I'm going to stay here and just let it play out. And it did play out, and it was fine. And she was released, and she has a story to tell her friends, especially now that we're back in the US, oh, there's that time I got tear gassed. But, at the time, your heart just seizes up. And again, the instinct as a mom is to rush to them and to say no. And again, putting on the ambassador hat to say, okay, there are security people, they're handling the situation. I know she's safe. I'm going to sit tight and, kind of model that to others. It was, tough.
That reminds me of something another guest on the podcast mentioned, my colleague who is in Iran at the moment, talking about how you can focus on what needs to be done when missiles are flying overhead, and it's basically trusting that other people are doing their parts of the job, right? And so you were saying you trusted that the school had them safe, they were reporting that they were safe, and that kind of gave you the headspace to focus on your role and projecting calm and good leadership.
No, exactly. And a lot of preparation goes into that. We had an excellent relationship with the school. I had a lot of meetings with the school head talking about security, talking about safety. Our security officer, their children went to the school. So I knew that was, top on their agenda as well. So it was that relationship. If that had been day one, I don't know that I would have been quite so calm, but, this was based on, a relationship that was built over time and trust in both directions.
Was your partner in the Foreign Service as well?
Yeah, my husband joined the Foreign Service about a year and a half after I did. He was and is a technical guy, so he joined the IT part of it. I think, he figured once he saw that I was going to stick with the job, he's like, well, if you can't beat him, join him. And he had a skill set that was needed. So he joined, and we were together. The phrase is a tandem in the U.S. State Department. We were a tandem for many years.
And so how does that work in practice? Because, in the British diplomatic service, it can be quite a challenge for both partners, actually, to have a fulfilling career. You know, they're often having to take time out, and there can be resentment. How did you make it work?
I'm incredibly lucky. My husband made the decision to support me. And so sometimes that meant that he was actually taking positions that were less challenging or less promotable for him so that I could take the lead. It was and remains like a huge sacrifice on his part. And I am ever grateful to him. He retired because there was no high school in Lesotho, my second ambassadorship. There was no high school available to my daughter, and she didn't want to go to boarding school. So he actually retired so that he could return with her to the US so she could start high school in what is now our hometown here in Virginia. So he really has sacrificed a lot. And I think, the sacrifice that all of our families make in the
Mm.
diplomatic service, but especially my husband, in allowing me to take the lead. If he didn't do what he had done, I couldn't have been an ambassador once, much less twice, yeah, so supportive and so kind and so generous of him.
Legend. If I was to ask him, would he categorize it as a sacrifice?
I don't know. I'm sure in the moment, I'm sure he felt it keenly. Now I don't know how he looks back on it, honestly. It's actually a great conversation. Maybe we'll have that conversation tonight. I really haven't asked him lately how he felt about it.
He wasn't my husband at the time, but I dragged him to Pakistan, and he sort of pivoted towards a very, very different career. And then we went to Egypt and he sort of pivoted again. So am also very, very lucky to have someone who is just like, right, okay, it's a new adventure. Let's see what we can make of it. But one of the reasons I left it was it got to be too much of an ask for all my boys, my husband and my sons, to just keep. I just couldn't be that person that was dragging everybody from one place to the other, particularly when I could see them so happy back here.
Yeah, certainly, I find that diplomatic families tend to be very tight knit because you do move around from place to place, and in my experience, they do tend to be a very tight unit, which is wonderful in so many ways. But it also means very often you have, many adults as children. They're sort of forced to take on these more mature roles at a young age, probably because they're exposed to so much. So it's interesting coming back to the U.S. and now she's in high school. The area that we're in has a lot of military families. In fact, diplomats from other countries go to her high school. So it is probably a more international experience than certainly the one that I grew up with. But definitely she's had a different upbringing than a lot of her cohort. And so I think I think she would have to answer this question, but as a parent, I tell myself that she's had experiences that others haven't had, and that she's, as a result, grown and been challenged in a way that other kids her age haven't. So I would hope that it would be considered a net positive in the end, but I don't know that she would agree all the time. I think it's hard to move from place to place. It's hard to leave your friends. It's hard to leave your school. And so, she had to do that several times.
Yeah, I mean, likewise, I think both my eldest was in about 5 different schools in the space of 5 years or something, and it's just. I mean, it's not like you can kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube. That it is what
Hmm.
it is. But I definitely, in both of them, I see that it's definitely shaped a resilience that perhaps their peers don't necessarily have developed yet. What's your reflections on resilience?
Certainly, my daughter, she has her own little like elevator speech, and she opens up. I've lived in 5 countries, and she's got her own little just her explanation for herself because, again, going to a new school and always having to adapt, she kind of has the ability now to sum herself up very quickly in a way that, again, I think a lot of other kids don't have to. I also one thing I think she learned, and maybe this is just her nature, she's very empathetic, and she would be the first, and I would hear this even from her primary school on, from her teachers, that she's the first one to reach out to the new kids. She's welcoming them because she knows what it's been like. And in fact, this year she volunteered to be a mentor for incoming freshmen at her high school because she knows what it's like to be thrown in, cold into a new environment. So I think it's given her a sense of empathy that I don't know that everyone has at a young age in that level.
When you became ambassador, I mean, that's a big leadership position. That's all sorts of leadership, isn't it? It's internal leadership and sort of thought leadership, I suppose, and
Hmm.
country leadership and all sorts of leadership. What preparation did you get?
Well, I think the best training I had was just coming up through the service, through decades of service. And then I was a deputy chief of mission, the number two at the embassy in Nigeria. Big embassy, lots going on. It was during, we had a national election while I was there. We had the rise of Boko Haram, the terrorist group that kidnapped schoolgirls. You may
Yeah,
remember. Yeah, yeah. I was there when that happened. So it was just an incredibly dynamic environment. And so I had a wonderful boss. He backed me specifically as his number two, and he taught me the power of trusting and supporting your subordinates. Sometimes people would they do what I call the ask mom, ask dad phenomenon. They'll ask the deputy, and then if they don't like the answer, they'll go and ask, the ambassador. And sometimes I would overhear him say, "Did you talk to Maria about this?" And they would say, "Yeah, but she said da 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 da." He said, "Then why are you talking to me? Like, if you
yes,
talk to her and she gave you the answer, that's the end of the conversation." And if he disagreed, he would sometimes come back to me and say, "Hey, Maria, why did you?" Or we'd talk about it, and he would allow me to change my mind if he didn't agree, but he never once undercut me, and that was
amazing.
such an amazing. Yeah, it was amazing to have a boss like that, and it taught me so much about how to treat your staff. So that was really, really the best apprenticeship I could have had was working, yeah, for this boss for 3 years.
I remember when I had my first leadership position, my boss took me aside one day and she says, when I ask you to do something, I don't necessarily expect you to do it. You've got a team of 10 people, one of them could do it. And it was such an obvious thing, but I had been, I need to do it all, I need to do it all, and kind of put myself under so much pressure. Yeah, I just want, I want it off my plate. I don't care how you do it, just get it done. You don't have to do it. So
Yeah, certainly. And my reaction is similar, like, "Oh, I can do it. I can do that. I can do that." And to the point where I would, be doing too much. And finally, I had a staff member talk to me and say, "Listen, when you just say, 'Oh, I'll handle it,' you're actually taking away the opportunity from the rest of us. You're not
that
doing us," because I thought I was doing them a favor. "Just take care. I can do that. Blah, blah." I've done it a million times. And they're like, "No, you're taking away the opportunity for me to do it, to learn. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it." And I was like, wow, that was so insightful. Just, yeah, like a lightning bolt. Like, oh, okay, like very, very eye opening.
That's amazing feedback. I often thought that the deputy ambassador role was harder in a way than the ambassador's role. Would you agree? Certainly in our system. The deputy ambassador keeps the show on
Hmm.
the road in terms of operations. They're in
Hmm.
charge of the accounts, the procurement, the human resources, the embassy security, like the security advice, like the whole kit and
Hmm.
caboodle in terms
Hmm.
of just keeping everybody alive and in work safely, and keep them air conditioned or keep
Hmm.
them warm, or all of it. But then when the ambassador goes on holiday or goes back
Hmm.
for training or
Hmm.
whatever, they suddenly have
Hmm.
to do that as well as all of the political strategic direction setting as well for however long that. So I just think it would be the most rewarding but the hardest job in the world.
Yeah,
How would you
yeah, I
characterize it?
agree. Absolutely. I 100% agree that it was that challenging. At the same time, it was a joy to work for a boss who had a vision. They tell you what they want done and they just let you do it. It is amazing. It's a wonderful experience. I would very often liken the role as like the principal and the vice principal. I don't know if you have this in the
Yeah.
UK,
Well, my
but
husband's a
the
vice
prince.
president.
Okay, so the principal's the one who's talking to the school board and meeting the parents and talking to the PTA and all that. Very high level.
Yeah.
I call it sort of cutting ribbons and kissing babies
Yeah.
work. And then the vice principal is the one with the paddle, like, okay, guys, And so that was very, very much with the deputy chief of mission, like, all right, the ambassador wants us to do this. How are we going to get it done? And, let's all get going and, go in the same direction, sort of being that yeah, that internal face. Yeah, so it was great. It was a fun
Tell me,
experience.
it's just made me think of, every embassy I went in, and when you read ambassadors will have a house style. So the Foreign Office has a style in terms of
Hmm.
writing, but each ambassador, because I suppose their name is at the bottom of every
Hmm.
single cable if
Hmm.
they're in post, they've got a very distinct style. Is that the same in the US system?
I think so. I think, depending on the size of the post, clearly, many posts, the ambassador only looks at the cables that are truly, high level and most, someone else deals with. But in some of the posts I was at, I would look at a good number of them. And a lot of it was and when I was ambassador, going through my deputy who did look at every single cable, just to say, like, this is how I want them to be. I want us to use short sentences and declaratives and fewer mitigating words. We love to, I think that possibly perhaps the situation might call for, we love to use mitigating words
Like
instead of just
say,
saying, yeah, instead of saying, this is this, we need to do this, they need to do that, just very directive and declarative statements. We love to hedge, I mean, we're diplomats, of course, we're going to hedge
yeah,
everything. We're
yeah.
always trying to, make sure that no matter what happens, the relationship can continue. But I would, encourage very strongly, let's just say what we're going to say and spend less time couching it in, language just in case we're wrong, So that was my sort of direction. I would try to take it in, but it's hard because the diplomatic style is like that. And even I find myself, years in couching everything. And I had to, even my emails, I would say, would you possibly, if you had a moment, do this instead of just saying, do this, please do that. I mean, politely, but directively.
I mean, I'm hopeless in an argument because I can't come down one way or the other. I'm like, well, this is how I feel, but of course, I could totally understand where you're coming
Hmm.
from.
Hmm.
Even coming down to where we want takeout. Well, we could go this place, but actually, I could also really.
Well, you do learn to see all sides, you learn to see your side, you learn to see the other person's side. When I was in the National Defense University, I went to a program for a year. We were studying negotiation, and there's a negotiating style, and I can't remember the name of it, where you're not actually negotiating against your opposite number. What you're doing is you're giving your opposite number information that they can take back to their bosses. And so you're actually not arguing with that person. You're actually just providing them with additional details or additional information so that they can explain to their bosses what your position is. I thought it was such a different, it's not a fight, it's not an argument, but rather I'm just providing you with information, and hopefully that will help you decide to do what I want you to do. It's just a fascinating way of looking at that, and it really made an impression on me.
As you say that, I remember being in quite a heated three-way negotiation. And I'm not going to say with whom, but it was other countries, allies. And we were all agreed on the end outcome, but everybody had different views about how we were going to get there. And one interlocutor, they kept saying, but these are our objections. And it dawned on me halfway through that what they wanted us to say was, well, this is our perspective on that objection. And the minute I twigged, everything calmed down and we just produced it, but it took a while. And
Mhm.
I would have very much welcomed going to that negotiation.
It's such a shift in perspective. We're not fighting. I'm just providing you with information that you can use when you talk to your bosses back at Capitol or back in your headquarters.
So what's in your view, what's the real view of an ambassador then? Because there's been quite a lot on this side of the
Hmm.
ocean and on yours,
Hmm.
like what's the point in having
Hmm.
diplomats? What's the
Hmm.
point? What would you say the point of having ambassadors and diplomats?
Yeah, well, certainly, you're literally the face of the US government. You embody, you know, the entire apparatus. And so when you speak, you're speaking with the force of the US government. So it's a weighty responsibility. But I find that knowing that and keeping that in mind allowed me to sort of hold that. And when I was speaking out, for example, democracy, both in Nigeria and in the two countries where I was ambassador, there were national elections, and talking about the power of democracy and the need to respect the will of the populace as expressed in the election in the voting booth. I'm not taking a position on the outcome. I would say very clearly that's not our role, but I am going to talk about the process and the need for the process to be free, fair, and transparent. In Sierra Leone, when I was there, I had a reception. We had a visiting VIP from the US, and I held a diplomatic reception at my residence. And I invited the candidates from all of the leading parties, including the two main parties. And they were having a very contentious relationship at the time. There were many fears of violence around the election. And we captured a photo of the two main candidates shaking hands and laughing with each other. We released that photo widely, and that said more about the relationship between the parties than a million speeches could have, or anything else that we had done. Was that when people talk about, oh, diplomatic receptions, what a waste of money, or oh, we're
Mhm.
just what they call a striped pants cookie pushers. That really, that was one case where a diplomatic reception had real value. And I will say, I think saved lives and reduced violence, because people could see that, hey, if the candidates can shake hands and share a joke, then you know, maybe we should all take the temperature down a little bit. And it was amazing, and
Mhm.
it was a real a tangible you know uh, a tangible way of showing the role of the ambassador, the role of the US embassy and others. We partner with the UK, we partner with the UN, we partner with the EU to sort of use our convening authority to bring parties together in a way that, again, a million position papers would never be able to do.
Yeah, as you were speaking, the word that kept coming through was convening, convening, convening. It's creating that space for democracy, I suppose, isn't it? People to come
Beautiful.
together.
No, no, it was great. And I would have to say, in the countries where I've served, the partnership with the UK, the UN, the EU, and the US, that was really, again, the countries I've served, we call it sort of the like-minded in many ways.
The dream
Not
team.
completely, yeah, not completely congruent. We might have, again, some differences of opinion, but definitely, using that. And I remember around about the time that I joined the Foreign Service in the mid '90s, we had a political candidate, a presidential candidate, say we should replace embassies with fax machines, and that we didn't even need embassies or ambassadors or anyone at these. We could just have fax machines, which is hilarious now, right? I mean, who even has a fax machine? Do young
Yeah,
people even know what a fax machine is? But it's just amusing that I think even with the technology, even with all the advances, it's the human touch that really makes all the difference.
100%.
Absolutely.
I was speaking to, I think, the same guest I was mentioning earlier, and we were talking about vibes reporting. And actually, I think as a desk officer or as someone in London, when I was trying to get a real sense of what's going on, I mean, you can see the stats coming out and you see the newspaper reports and all the rest of it, but, particularly in crises or something was a
Mhm.
political event was happening in the country, you really lent on the embassy staff to give you the vibes, to really give you the flavour of what was happening and how we should frame our response in
Mhm.
relation to what was actually happening as well.
Absolutely.
You, apart from Nigeria, I'm sensing a pattern that you were drawn to smaller embassies. Was there a particular reason for that?
Yeah, I liked the increased autonomy. As someone joked, no one wakes up in the morning and saying, "Oh, what's happening in Lesotho?" And if they do,
Yeah.
there's something has really gone wrong. But you had a certain amount of autonomy. Of course, you have the broad you know, policy, and where your parameters are. But within those parameters, you had the ability to sort of carry them out the way that you saw fit, sort of day to day. And that was nice. We call it like the 8,000-mile screwdriver from Washington, D.C. is very long. It can have a very fine tip, right? And sometimes the desire to meddle, is that the right word, to direct activities in a foreign
Offer
country.
guidance.
Yes, very strong guidance. It can be very strong. But going to these posts, it was much less, and so that was very nice. Again, I knew what I needed to do, and I was able to do it, right? Also, they were more training posts with more junior staff, and I really enjoyed that, especially as I became more senior. I realized how much I enjoyed working with junior staff and sort of, helping them along. So it tended to be the smaller posts that were very often understaffed, that we would have junior folks taking on these roles that normally they wouldn't have a chance to take on for another posting or two several years. So helping them and like preparing them for taking leadership roles, that was so much fun and very satisfying.
When I speak to colleagues that are thinking of leaving the service, and I say to them, so what is the kind of stuff that fills your cup? Like if we were to hone, and they're like, I don't know what to do. Okay, well, let's
Hmm.
focus on the kind of stuff that you really were in flow with. Like, what did you love
Hmm.
doing? What about your role? And almost to a person, they say exactly the same. It was the leadership. It was the training those underneath. It was just the really bringing on the generation that really made them happy. You will disagree, but you're at post, you're ambassador, you've got the flagged cars, you've sometimes got on special days, motorcycle outriders, you are a VIP. And then you come back to Capital and you are not a VIP.
You're
I
just
used
another
to see
bureaucrat. You're just another bureaucrat. Yeah. And they're a
I
dime a
used to
dozen
see
here in
these
DC. Yeah.
And you see these, I used to see these poor ambassadors who would have to get the tube every morning, like with the rest of us unwashed.
Yeah.
How did you make that adjustment from being like super special to just be
Yeah.
one of the men?
I think part of it is just, having your head on your shoulders and, your feet on the ground. I never confused myself with my title.
Yeah.
Sometimes my title was, the thing, and it still is. I still sometimes, depending where I'm at, I'll say retired US ambassador, and all of a sudden, So, it is a useful tool, but it's not really who you are. It is, a title that you wear, like a suit, or it's just something that you put on. I think it's dangerous when people start to confuse themselves with the office or with the title. um,
I agree. It's not very healthy at all. So you mentioned you're not quite retired. I think September 26th is the big day, isn't
the
it?
final day, yeah, when I'm actually out. Yeah.
But you've been gradually sneaking off the
Yes.
off the rhythm.
Yes, well, we have this wonderful system at the State Department where you can take a retirement transition course. And it's a great program. You spend a month in class training, and it includes everything from like emotional, changes, right? You're
Mm.
going from leaving this all encompassing role to being a retiree, as well as like literally, do you want to do a job? Do you want to volunteer? Do you want to write a book? Do you want, all the things that people do, and including opening their own businesses. So it was very helpful.
And reframing it, right?
Yes.
Because, I could probably read your Foreign Service CV and likewise. And if I said
Hmm.
I was first sec in Cairo, you would
Hmm.
know instantly what a first
Yeah.
secretary does.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Whereas, everyone out of that world would go, what? Like, were you
Yeah.
like an
You were a
assistant?
secretary? Yeah, I didn't know you
Yeah,
were a
yeah,
secretary.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were a bit more senior than that. Yeah. So is there any grief yet? Are you anticipating any grief?
It is hard. I got married less than a week after I joined. I joined the Foreign Service on July 15th, and I got married the 23rd. Right. So it has been more than half of my adult life. I joined at 23. I'm 52 now. 29 years. So it really is, in some ways, like a divorce. It's not just,
Yes.
again, it was so all pervasive in how I identified myself for many years. Foreign service officer, I worked for the Foreign Service, I worked for the State Department, and so letting that go, it has been very hard. I have sort of medicated by jumping into coaching, and it was something that I always wanted to do when I retired, but I just sort of ripped off the Band-Aid during this job search transition program. And I said, well, let me go ahead and hang out my shingle and start, seeing if I can get any clients. So that by the time, it truly ends, I'll have a business. And I found within a very short period of time that I actually had a growing coaching business. So it's been
Amazing.
fantastic. But I think that's really how I've dealt with it, is by jumping wholeheartedly into something else.
You've gone straight into a new relationship, Maria.
Yeah, I know.
Divorce papers. I mean, the
Not
divorce
even dry
decree
yet.
hasn't even come.
I know. I'm a serial monogamist, I guess, when it comes to
Yes,
professions.
exactly. You're the opposite of commitment shy. I want
Hmm.
commitment. I want commitment.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, what's your name of your coaching business?
It's Brewer Coaching Services, and my tagline is "Bloom where planted," and that's a phrase that I've used a lot over the years. And for me, it means like wherever you are, whatever you're given to do, just do it wholeheartedly, do your best, and it will take you places, right? I found that overseas, I would sometimes have colleagues that were kind of too good for whatever role they were given. If they were a delegation of folks from Congress, right? We call them a CODEL. You're a member of Congress, your senator, your representative, and his or her gaggle of staff. You would have to support them when they were traveling overseas. And if you were told your job is to watch the luggage, that was your job. And I would colleagues say, oh, I'm too good for that, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, listen, if they leave this country and their luggage has gone missing, they're not going to say, oh, the embassy did such a wonderful program. We met with this room. We saw this issue. We understood more about. No, they're going to go, they lost our luggage. Really, there is no role that is too small. And frankly, if I ask you to watch the luggage as your senior and you can't do that, then what
How am
makes
I
you
going
think
to trust?
I'm going to take you with me to see the prime minister as a note taker?
Yeah,
I don't think
yeah,
so.
yeah.
And so that to me is the essence of bloom where planted. Like, hey, if you're given a job, like do it wholeheartedly. And people say, okay, I can trust you with that. Now I can trust you with the next thing. I can trust you with the next thing. So as I was looking to coaching, I thought, well, let's pull that in as well. How do you make the most of whatever situation you're in?
You mentioned to me offline that your ideal client are leaders stepping into the next level. Is it that niche, or is it broader in reference to your blooming?
I mean, it can be broader, and certainly, coaching, you can coach anyone, but I have a particular passion for people who are in transition, people who are particularly women of color, but really anyone who's moving to that next level. One thing I found was that the skills that got me to where I was were not necessarily the skills that would make me successful. I could be the best at writing political analysis in the world, but when I was the head of a political section, a political chief with, 5 people under me, that skill wasn't as important as my ability to motivate and manage and tell my team what I needed from them and direct their workload. So I think a lot of people, they find themselves in that next level of leadership and they're not ready, and they try to do their old job, and that usually is not good for anyone involved. So, helping people
Yeah.
really take on that new role.
Well, it's a different skill set, isn't it? I think, I see it quite a lot in the private sector. You're often promoted into a leadership role because you're good technically at what your specialism is. So say you're a really good salesperson, you'll get promoted to be head of sales. And somehow I think they assume that in becoming head of sales, somehow you become an amazing leader, but that's more by accident than design, I think. So giving people support around the different skill set sounds right up your street. What do you think the other big challenges or the gaps that your ideal clients are struggling with?
I think, part of it is the inner saboteur, that voice in your head that says you can't do it, you don't belong here, the imposter syndrome, again, especially for women. But I think for everyone, there's a certain amount of, oh, you've been given this title, you've been given this role, this promotion, and you're not up to the task. And it's that voice telling you you're not. And how do you identify that voice, take from it what is valid? Sometimes, it is a warning. It's telling you to be
Mm-hmm.
ready, to be alert, but not let it cripple you. And there's like a healthy fear, right? There's a healthy amount of understanding, but there's also the destructive, and how to keep focusing on the positive and figuring out how it can take you, and countering that voice saying, okay, thank you. But you know what? I've been in tough positions before. I'll figure it out this time. Or you're right. I do need to knuckle down and do my best and focus, and I'm going to do that. But, thank you, and sort of
Yeah,
set it
yeah, yeah,
aside,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
so yeah, it's really a challenge, but it's one that I love working with people and saying, okay, what is your saboteur? Give me examples. Well, how would you respond to that? Or how would you tell that person, if it were another person, what would you tell them? Like, hey, thanks for sharing, but back off, so they can do it for themselves.
I agree with you, and I've learnt many of the same techniques myself. There's another one around what do you think that inner person or, that alter ego is protecting you from? And, when you identify that, it's then saying, thank you for protecting me from that. I kind of don't need you anymore. I got
Hmm.
this. Anyway, we could talk about this all day, I'm sure. I suppose one final question then. What would be the one message you want women in particular,
Hmm.
perhaps even women in
Hmm.
colour if we want to go
Hmm.
specific,
Hmm.
stepping into leadership? What do you want them to take from your journey?
That you really do have to be prepared. You have to be, very good and very competent. But at the same time, you shouldn't try to mold yourself into someone that you're not. I think you have to be authentic to who you are. You have to show up with your whole self. And I think sometimes women will try to, carve off parts of their being, their personality, so that they can fit a mold that they think is required. And the truth is, your authentic self is the most powerful thing that you can be and that you can bring to any situation. Whether that's leading with empathy or kindness, whether that's, uplifting voices that might be marginalized, those are some of the most powerful things that you can do and only you can do sometimes. When I was overseas as ambassador and as DCM, I would meet with sometimes marginalized communities that maybe weren't being represented, but yet they had a viewpoint that was very important to understand. And so I think I found that sort of leaning into those skills and those parts of myself, I was able to tap into these communities in a way that probably others may not have, deemed important or useful to do. But I thought it was very important to do that. And again, it was sort of leaning on my own background that helped me focus on others in that way. So it's very important. I think being authentic. Yes, of course, you always fit into a certain mold. You moderate your language. You sort of code shift as you move from one environment to the other, of course. But really, your authentic self, and showing up with your background intact and leaning on your history and leaning on your pride. That's something no one else can do but you. So do it. Don't let anyone else take that away
Amazing.
from you.
That's beautiful. I think
Yeah.
that is a beautiful place to end our conversation. Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been lovely, really.
Before I forget, where
Yes.
can potential clients get in touch with you?
I would say the best way to do it is to check the notes
Show notes?
with this podcast, and there'll be a link to my company is called Brewer Coaching Services. My last name is Brewer. I'm a coach and I do service. That's a great name for my business. So I'm on LinkedIn under both Brewer Coaching Services and Maria Brewer, but you can definitely find me. And I love meeting clients from all over. Again, I have a particular passion for women and women of color and those moving into new roles. A lot of my federal colleagues from other agencies and from the state and USAID who are transitioning are my particular passion, but I love all clients. I met the other day with a woman who's a rocket scientist, a literal rocket scientist, and
Amazing.
fascinating. So, whatever your walk of life, I am fascinated to talk to you. I really, really love coaching.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much. 3 insights from Maria's journey really struck me as game changers for any leader stepping up. First, authentic leadership isn't about fitting a mold. It's about bringing your whole self to the role. Maria's point about meeting with marginalised communities, for example, that others deemed unimportant, wasn't just good diplomacy. It was strategic intelligence gathering that only her authentic perspective could unlock. In business terms, your unique background isn't something to hide. It's competitive advantage to leverage in the right situations. Second, the transition paradox Maria highlighted, that the skills that got you here won't get you there. So the skills that got you promoted aren't necessarily a guarantor for success. The brilliant political analyst, for example, had to become a team motivator. The technical expert has to become a strategic thinker. Most executives I coach and consult with try to keep doing their old job at a higher level. Real leaders learn to delegate their former expertise and develop new capabilities. But the real revelation was her approach to the inner saboteur, that voice telling you you're not ready, you're not good enough, what if you fail? Maria's technique of saying, "Thank you for the warning, but I figured tough things out before," transforms imposter syndrome from paralysis into preparation. So here's what I want you to try this week. Next time you're in a meeting, spend the first 5 minutes in pure receive mode. Don't plan a response, don't wait to speak, just listen to understand. Watch what happens to the dynamic when one person stops transmitting and starts truly receiving. I'm Jen Upton, and this is How to Diplomat. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, if you want to go deeper into any of the topics discussed on this or any of my episodes, I write more deeply about what I learned from my guests, along with insights from my 20 plus years as a diplomat and army officer, weekly in my newsletter, Diplomatic Dispatches. Links in the show notes. Also, if you're interested in being coached by Maria, and let's face it, who wouldn't, all of her contact details are also in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening.